My mom created a fun way for us to learn the most important rules of life. Yah's command.
With Yah's Big Ten Commands, we get to see His what's best for us.
Keep Yah first.
No graven images.
Don't take Yah's name in vain.
Remember Sheba and keep it holy.
Honor your parents.
Do not kill.
Mr. and Mrs., don't cheat.
Don't steal.
Don't tell lies.
Don't covet.
This changes everything. Get your set of Yah's Big Ten Commands at Big Ten Designs today.
Even when I'm weak, your word sustains me. I can suffer long. Nothing can change me or take away my love of y'all. Into the future, needing answers so bad. It's hard to bear. Someone is raging too high. It's all consuming.
Grace and peace, everyone. Salama and welcome. I'm so glad to have y'all on here tonight. We have an amazing discussion planned. I know why y'all are here, and we're going to get into it in a minute, but I just want to tell y'all how excited I am about this discussion tonight. So for those of you who are new to my platform, maybe you've come on just this past 2024 Gregorian calendar year, or you've been on for maybe the last year or two, and you don't know my background of getting started on this platform. I'll just clue you in and let you know that the person who I'm interviewing tonight is one of a team. Okay, him and his twin brother. And they have a phenomenal ministry called Teo Ministries, all right? And they together are the brothers that brought me into the community, okay? I am so excited because I get the opportunity to interview the man who first saw me I guess it's been about 4 years now, some 4 years ago on this channel, and said, that sister's all right. She's doing good work. And he reached out to me. I already knew who he was from Dante Fortson from Black History in the Bible. And when he reached out to me, I was blown away. And he brought me on his platform and interviewed me. And now I get the opportunity to interview him on my platform. And I'm just so glad, because this is such an amazing blessing. So thank y'all so much for being here tonight. I'm getting ready to introduce none other than the amazing Yakoba Eveo of Teo Ministries. Yakoba is a phenomenal researcher, teacher, He is an amazing minister. And what the work that he has put out in this social media atmosphere has helped to wake many of Yasharel up. And I'm just so grateful because now he can add to the docket on all the things that he already is, an author. And we're going to be talking about his new book tonight, all right, which is a phenomenal read. Don't tell him I said that. But his new book, True Jerusalem, The Lost Kingdoms of the Israelites. We're going to be talking about that tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Ashanda at large, especially my audience, to throw up some fire emojis for the one and the only Yakoba Eveo. Salama, welcome, bro. How you doing?
Salama, Sister Ashanda. Salama, family. I couldn't have written a better introduction. Thank you, Sister Ashanda. That was a great introduction.
All true, all true. You know, I'm just so glad to have you here because, see, a lot of people, they don't know our history. They don't know, you know, for those of you who saw me last week on the corporate prayer, and you may not know, you know, who I am. Yakoba knows who I am. And I'm grateful because, you know, there's not much balance in this community. Unfortunately, we who woke up to our Israelite identity, we're like treading through some serious woods, some wilderness. And when you talk about being able to find balance, when you talk about being able to find brethren that know the word, they are rock solid still in their faith in the Messiah, Yahushua HaMashiach. That is just, that's a breath of fresh air. And that's what I found with you. That's what I found with your brother, with the entirety of your ministry. And so I'm so excited tonight because you've taken a step of faith, a leap of faith, and now you are an author. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about your new work. I'm going to put it up again really quickly. What is it like to have taken the process of making and writing your own book, True Jerusalem, The Lost Kingdoms of the Israelites?
Well, it was over time. Y'all know, y'all were on a journey with me over the years, researching where True Jerusalem is, where Israel is. And some of the concepts we have to adjust from Eurocentric Christianity. And that's why, you know, a lot of us stay where we're at because we can't see past the deception, the Hellenization of the text, stuff like that. And so one thing I like to do, since I'm a technical guy, I need evidence, right? I need things to make sense. And so when I began my research, there was several steps that I knew I had to pursue, which was, you know, I had to say, okay, well, who's the people, right? Well, we know who the people is, right? So, you know, how do we determine that? Through the ethnic practices, right? You know, circumcision, libation, stuff like that. Then it's like, okay, well, what are the traditions of these various tribes? Who are they? What does the Bible say about these tribes? Where did they go? They say, well, the 10 lost tribes, like they disappeared off the planet, right? So then, you know, hey, I start finding who the people are, where they at, their traditions, their history, where they say they come from. And so then, you know, so we look at it from the viewpoint of the, let's say, the Europeans' history, because, you know, most of the written texts are from Europeans and what they say about us. So once we had that, then we look at the oral history. Well, what do they say about themselves? Right. And so that's one of the things I do, too. And finally, what do the archaeologists say? Because, you know, I'm here to prove that True Jerusalem is in Abyssinia, or what we call today Ethiopia. And so a lot of people will rely on feelings. I feel this, I feel that. I hear that a lot, right? I don't think, right? But did you research? And so, you know, I've been spending time on this, and you know, I've come to the conclusion, like I say, I don't usually say 100% on anything, right? Just over my life, I'd be like 90-something%, 99%. I'm going to say and have said that I'm 100% convinced, right, that the true Jerusalem is in what we call today Ethiopia, in the highlands of Ethiopia.
Wow. And you know what? I think that what you're saying is so important for us to understand because we're unpacking so much of, or really coming into a place of dissecting so much of what we have learned through our time in Christendom. And now we're unpacking the lies and being able to find just a geographical location of where we actually came from, knowing by the grace of Yahuwah that we are the chosen seed, that we are the bloodline Israelites. Now, where is our home? Where do we go from here? And that has been the question that's been on the beaten pulse of many of our thoughts, many of our minds. And so you taking the time to research all this information and put it in book form is amazing. And we're definitely going to be discussing this tonight. So I want to thank you for that. Let's go ahead and discuss some of the particulars in your book, because I too also, just like those of you who have commented, I received my copy and it is a fantastic read. I'm enjoying it. One of the reasons why I enjoy it, to be honest with you, before I get started on the questions, is because you make it very plain what you're communicating. It's not written in a way that is so scholarly that it goes over the average person's head. And I think that that's very important because, you know, as Habakkuk 2:2 says, that we are to write the vision and make it plain so that he that reads it may be able to run with it. So I like how you were able to just break things down in a way that anybody who wanted to just simply pick it up to understand maybe the basics of what the argument is concerning the land as a whole, sub-Saharan Africa, and just understand from that position versus what the narrative has been to place our people and our origin within what we know as the quote unquote Middle East. So I do think that the way that you wrote the book is just such an easy read. And those of you who have not gotten your opportunity to get this, you need to definitely do so. This is tools in your arsenal to use whenever it is that you're trying to communicate to our people, not just that we are Israel, but where we come from and why it's important. So I'm going to talk about certain things that stood out to me. And let's talk about the first being Emperor Hadrian. Okay. So you shared in chapter 1 that in the 2nd century CE, Emperor Hadrian played a pivotal role in obscuring the true location of Jerusalem after the Bar Kokhba revolt. Now, can you tell us who Emperor Hadrian was and why did the inhabitants of Jerusalem stage a revolt against him?
Yeah, so they had a revolt against Rome. And Emperor Hadrian, after, he suppressed the rebellion, he didn't want the Israelites to ever find their land again. And so he renamed it to Aelia Capitolina. And so what a lot of people try to, say is that the place in the Middle East, that's what I call it, the dirt in the Middle East, they try to say, well, that's the land, that's the location. And so he didn't end up fulfilling or accomplishing what he wanted. But yet we can find out that this was an agenda of his, right? And so all of this is based upon the fulfillment of Psalm 83. And I'm going to read that right quick. It says, O Yahuwah, do not remain silent. Do not turn a deaf ear. Do not stand aloof, O Elohim. See how your enemies growl, how your foes rear their heads. With cunning they conspire against your people. So there's this conspiracy against us. They plot against those you cherish. Come, they say, let us destroy them as a nation so that Israel's name is remembered no more. And so it also goes on to say that to remove them far away from their border, right? And we know this is what happened during the transatlantic slave trade, right? We know the history from Spain and Portugal, how we were put in Angola and the Congo, different things. And as I mentioned on my show, my brother coming out with a history book, and you're going to see some of the other things that have occurred during those times. And so what I wanted to do with the book was try to take you on a journey. And so I start off with the conspiracy. And the conspiracy is based upon Psalm 83 and how they conspired against us. And here's the thing. We don't understand how big the lie is. The lie is so huge. It is so huge that you won't believe it, right? The places, the names, the rivers, everything that you believe you understand are incorrect, right? But you can only come to this conclusion through diligent research. So we had this conspiracy. And so you have to find out, well, okay, they conspired to move us far away from our land. Emperor Hadrian wanted to hide who we were. Emperor Hadrian said that if a Jew comes back to the land, they are to be killed, right? This is how serious it was. But then they want to tell us that, oh, it never happened. The place in the Middle East is our land, blah, 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 right? But when you start asking questions, right, you have like Psalms 125, too. It says, as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so Yahuwah surrounds his people, both now and forevermore. So in my book, I talk about what the Bible says the land should look like, right? And what we call the Middle East location is not surrounded by mountains. I mean, people keep trying to tell me that, and I'm like, it's not, right? And so when we look at that, and then we look at extra biblical texts like Jubilees, Jasher, and different things, we get another description of the land. And so what I found was that none of what they say fits that land. And, I go into what the Bible says. I go into some of the stories in the Bibles, and we're going to talk about some of that. And literally, look, once you take the time and look at it, you're going to have to agree that's not the land. Whether or not you agree with me that Ethiopia is the place, which I'm convinced, you have to admit that it can't be the land if you believe the scriptures. If you believe the scriptures. Because that's one thing I learned, right, is that most people don't believe the scriptures. They say they do.
I know.
And like I say, yeah.
No, you make an excellent point. Most people don't believe the scriptures, even though they say they do. And I agree with you. Once you actually start doing the research and digging in, it's very hard to fit that particular portion of land and say that's ours. Now, some of the arguments would be that I've heard that in itself is a portion of our land still. The Middle East, the state of Israel, that's a portion of our land. I believe the elder Hoshua believes that. But my thing is that when you look into the archaeological digs, then the bones must reflect that. They must reflect the Canaanites, because it's also the land of Canaan. So we find that in sub-Saharan soil that you will find more of an archaeological footprint and anthropological footprint there in sub-Saharan Africa of the true Israelites, and not of them in that particular portion of land that they call the state of Israel. So thank you so much for letting us know about this particular person, Emperor Hadrian. I thought that was very interesting that you said that he said, if any Jews return here, then to delete them, right? So when he was talking and saying that, he was talking specifically about Abyssinia, specifically about Ethiopia.
Well, if you believe that Ethiopia is the land, then yes, that is where, he was talking about, not the Middle East. And so here's the thing, what I tried to accomplish was, to bring you along the journey, understand that there's a conspiracy, understand just as historically through Emperor Hadrian, that there was a conspiracy to hide who we are and to keep us from our land. That's the history of Emperor Hadrian. The other thing I wanted to do is to show that the land in the Middle East was never a land flowing with milk and honey, never a land surrounded by mountains, never fit the description, whether you talk about Tel Arad or you talk about the modern Jerusalem. It could never fit. It never fit. It does not fit the description from the Bible. And, so, like I said, some people move off of emotions. Some people move off of agendas, right? And so when it comes to the truth, you have to spend the time to find the truth. The Bible says, seeking you shall find, knocking the door shall be open. You have to pursue him, and you have to pursue truth. It's not going to just be handed to you.
Amen. And very well said. Okay, so you said that Emperor Hadrian renamed the city of Jerusalem into a Roman city named Aelia Capitolina, erased its ancient identity, built a temple to Jupiter, and expelled the Jews from living there. Now, where is Aelia Capitolina located today?
Well, they would tell you today that that's in the Middle East, but it had to be former Jerusalem, which I believe, and I'm going to just I'm gonna get ahead if I tell you where it is, but let me just say this.
Okay.
I believe that Axum is the true Jerusalem. I believe that Yeha is a suburb of Jerusalem. And I'll tell you where the Temple Mount is after we continue.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we got something to look forward to. All right. Now, my question about Ethiopia, right? Because I'm still on this learning journey, but I heard that Ethiopia is the only country in Africa that has not been colonized. But with Emperor Hadrian's actions, they seem to reflect a different narrative. So can you speak to that idea? Has Ethiopia always remained independent, even with the siege by Emperor Hadrian?
So here's the thing. They say that, right? That is a misnomer, right? Because Ethiopia was conquered by the Italians for a short period. I think they controlled it for like 5 years, right? And so they weren't there long enough to, learn the Italian language and start changing the customs and tradition. But they were conquered, right? Now, the other thing is people will try to make the argument that Rome never conquered Ethiopia and was never in Ethiopia and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, from the history that was written and given to you. One thing we do know is that the Romans conquered North Africa and parts of Northeast Africa, but they decided to ignore what we call Abyssinia or Ethiopia, right? Which was a major trading hub on the Red Sea. And part of what we call Djibouti was part of that territory, right? So they want us to believe that, right? But we know that at the very least, and they'll admit this in some of the historical documents, is that they at least were doing trade in the area with the Romans, right? But I contend that they did control Ethiopia. I believe that Axum is the true Jerusalem, and we're gonna discuss that. And we're not gonna be able to get in everything. To be honest with you, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't even put in the book, right? Because it's just too much, right?
For the sake of time.
My point.
I mean,
for the sake of time.
Yeah, but it's a lot to unpack. I've just actually been able to start reading the material, but even what you have at the beginning is just so meaty. So that's why I'm trying to get this breakdown, because I want it to be an elementary style. Because again, when you talk about the fact that so much has been changed, right? Rivers and land masses, the names, all of these things have been changed. And I agree with you. But putting the puzzle together, it's like we have to take a slow walk. So this is going to be something that we have to just chew one bite at a time. So what I want to ask you now is a specific quote from your book. And if you can unpack that for us. This historical obscuring of Hadrian is one reason why the identification of Jerusalem's true location has been subject to debate, and why some, like the proponents of the Ethiopian hypothesis, argue that the true Jerusalem might be located elsewhere, possibly in Africa, where other historical and cultural connections to ancient Israelite practices are evident. So what is the Ethiopian hypothesis, and what are some of the arguments against modern Ethiopia being the true location of Israel?
Well, they state that Ethiopia and Lalibela and stuff was created by King Lalibela when they became a Christian nation, and the argument is that the nation of Ethiopia, what we call Ethiopia today, Abyssinia in the past, was created after Menelik, which was supposedly be the son of King Solomon, hooked up with Queen of Sheba. And they became a Christianized nation. We're going to talk about that too in a minute.
Yeah. Okay.
And so he brought the Ark of the Covenant there. That's the argument, right? And but when you look into that, I mean, that doesn't align with the scriptures and the historicity of what the Bible says the descendants of Israel is. So I'm not convinced of that story of Menelik. But there has been a history of them identifying as being the true land, right? They have stated in their own writings that Axum is Jerusalem, but then you'll hear two sides of this that'll say, well, no, it's not, right? But you will find that a lot of them, the elite, believed that that was the land. But you know, they had a they referred to it as the second Jerusalem. Now, here's the thing. All right, they call Ethiopia the second Jerusalem, and they say the reason it's the second Jerusalem is because they couldn't make a pilgrimage to the promised land, or quote unquote the Holy Land in the Middle East. Now, they're only a few thousand miles away from the Middle East. I mean, they could make that pilgrimage, right? You know, if you look on the map, it's really not that far, especially if you get on a ship and cross the Red Sea. It's not that difficult.
Okay.
So why would you go through all the effort, right, to create all of these churches and all of these, you know, they call them churches today. I don't believe they're churches. I don't think they were churches. I think they're repurposed structures in Lalibela and surrounding areas. But some places are churches. And why would you spend that kind of effort, time, and history, you know, identifying as a second Jerusalem? I mean, we're going to talk about some things. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, right? I mean, you have a River Jordan, you got everything, and, you know, we'll go into that. But
so you have a river Jordan in Ethiopia. I know there's like a ton of biblical artifacts and information. Was like you're supposed to have the Ethiopian Bible there. You said the Ark of the Covenant is supposed to be there. So this is they called Ethiopia the second Jerusalem because they couldn't make a pilgrimage there. According to them, from the Middle East, they were supposed to. That's where they were supposed to be. Doing the feast days for the pilgrimage, and they couldn't. Exactly. Okay.
So they decided that they were going to spend all of this money, and King Lalibela created all these churches and these buildings. Right now, understand that there's there's 12 churches supposedly. Now, all you ever hear about is 11. That's all you ever hear, that there are 11, but there really are 12 churches, and I talk about that in my book about what those churches represent. In my opinion, that I believe they were repurposed, but they were we'll talk about that as we go, but they were repurposed.
Yeah, and I want to ask you before I move on to my prepared questions, but I want to ask you about specifically the Ethiopian Bible. Maybe you can give me a little bit of a little bit clarity with that, because if I look online for the Ethiopian Bible, it looks to me somewhat like there's Caucasian imagery that's in there now. And I thought the original Ethiopian Bible showed that the apostles and the Messiah were all melanated people. Am I tripping, or is that something that has now come into play where we're whitewashing the Ethiopian Bible as well?
So with that has happened because even in the churches, they're starting to put up white images in the churches when they had people of color, let's say. Now, I'm of the opinion that most of the people that you see as the face of Ethiopia, like the Amharic, I don't believe they're Israelites. I have my opinion on who they are, but I don't have no proof.
Okay. And, so you're talking about the ones that necessarily like represent, let's say, what they would call Jewish Ethiopian, the ones that they put in front of the television all the time, or are these these other Ethiopians?
Well, I'm talking about the leadership. Because some of the some of the religious Jews that went to Israel, some of them are Israelites, right? Now remember, back in the 80s, you had the famine, right? And all of these kids, they were showing them with bloated stomachs and the flies and all that kind of stuff. I believe a lot of those were Israelites, right? And they were over there in the Gondor area. And I forgot there's another area they were in as well. And I believe a lot of those, because the way to identify an Israelite is the curses.
Right.
And so whoever's the lowest, now you will see some of the Ethiopians, they look just like us. They don't look like the Amharic people, right? But you don't see them too much as representing, you know, the Ethiopian people. And so, you know, you got the Oromo and all these people, and, you know, that's a whole different story as well about who they may be. And because some of the Oromo went into captivity as well. Right. So there's a lot that has gone on because Ethiopia was part of the Arabic slave trade. Right. And so a lot of us went through Ethiopia as well and became slaves to the Muslims. So that's a whole thing in and of itself.
So you say Ethiopia was a part of the Arabic slave trade. Was that by the hand of Ethiopian Islamists, or was that how
Well,
do
it
we
was
intersect?
it was a trading route.
Okay, it was
And
a trading
so
route.
all of the goods, whether they were slaves or whatever, went through that area, right?
Wow. So do you think along the way, some Ethiopian Israelites were also captured and made to be Arabic slaves as well? Or
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
okay. So they were touched by
Yeah,
it as well.
yeah, and they admit some of the Bantu people went through there, right, as slaves. And
Wow.
so when we look at the history of Ethiopia, remember, according to the scriptures, Jerusalem was occupied and controlled by Rome. And when we were kicked out, remember the Most High told us to flee to the mountains. And so, you look in the modern Middle East, you say, well, what mountains? What? Jordan? I'm like, what mountains? Because the closest mountains are in Jordan, right? And but when you look at Ethiopia, you can see where they went. In my opinion, they went to the Simeon Mountains. And it's called the Simeon Mountains because they got monkeys there, right? And so there's a history of a Jew. They call it Jewish, right? That's what they called us.
Right.
They had a Jewish kingdom in the Simeon Mountains. And they've been there, according to them, for over 2,000 years.
Wow.
So if you had Jews living in the Simeon Mountains for over 2,000 years, then obviously they're not migratory people. They've been there a long time. So maybe they might be the original people. And so then you had people.
No, I was going to ask you really quickly because I read in your book that you were talking about the customs. Is that how they determined their Jewishness or their Israelite heritage, because of their customs, or did they have some other measurement as to how they determined that these Ethiopians were a part of the 12 tribes?
Well, they know about Beta Israel, right? And so Beta Israel is the ones that went over there, a lot of them, to the Middle East, right? But Beta Israel was also, and I'm not saying all of them were, because let me say this: Eldad the Danite, he was a black Jew, right? And the Ashkenaz know about him and they write about him. And he told them about Jews that live in Ethiopia. And there were a handful, like I think 4 tribes still in Ethiopia during his time. And one of the tribes was the tribe of Dan. And so there's still Danites in that area, but there are also Danites that moved to West Africa, right? They're over there in Dahomey. And so they're known as the tribe of Dan. The Ashkenaz called them the tribe of Dan. I'm like, all of this stuff is there.
Wow.
Right. And so when we look at the history, we start piecing these things together, where they were, what did Eldad say? What did other scholars say? Right. And we start to find that if you look at the history books before 1920, almost every single book said the Jews were black. Not only were they black, they were black Africans.
Right.
Not only black Africans, they were of a Negroid strain. Right.
Come on now.
Not only that, they had dosicocephalic head shapes. I'm like, you cannot deny that we're the people. So in the book, I say, find the people and you find the land.
Right.
Right. And so that's why I start following the people. I didn't go through all of them, because to be honest with you, there's a lot of different tribes that I have identified, know. And just to let y'all know, some stuff even recently, because, I belong to a group now that we formed with 2 other guys. Yah is Very Real, and Sean Judah. Is called Africa Israelite Collective, right? So what we do is we come together and we discuss what we know about the history, where we think, according to some scholars, some of the biblical places are, because what I believe, and I think we all believe, is that everything in the Bible happened on the continent. Everything in the Bible happened on the continent.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about the modern Ethiopians. Now, we talked briefly about Beta Israel, and I'm just understanding that there's different segments now from listening to you, different groups, if you will, like us diasporans, right? Some of us are quote unquote African American or Caribbean American or British Blacks, but within Ethiopia, there's also different groups. So I want to ask you, and if you could highlight for us, um, the those who are currently occupying the land or the state of Israel, do you believe that they're Shemitic, Hamitic, both or both, and why do you believe that? Because when I think about the lineage of Ham and one of his sons with Ethiopia, that's what kind of puts me in this, you know, it puts me in kind of a quandary, because as far as I understand that Ethiopians are largely Hamitic, and outside of the story of the Queen of Sheba, which we're going to get into, Queen of Sheba and Solomon, that there weren't any Israelite descendants, if you will, in that family line. So can you break that down for us so we can have a better understanding?
Okay, which family line?
Ethiopia, as far as Ethiopia,
Okay,
are they
so here's the
Hamitic,
thing.
Shemitic, or both?
Here's the thing, and this is, I think, a problem that we have. We have to separate the terminology as, like, for instance, if I say you're an American, and I say, well, all of the Americans this, and Ashanda, you're an American, and so when I talk about Americans, I'm including you, I'm including white folks, I'm including Mexicans, I'm including, you know what I'm saying? Because
Right.
America is a classification over everybody who live in America.
Right.
Well, in the United States. It's the same thing with Ethiopia. There's over 40 to 80 something tribes in the Ethiopian territory, which we will call Ethiopians because they live in that area, right? And then inclusive in that is Eritrea, right? Which is another, country which is in the same area, which was part of our land, our territory. So you have Eritreans. But you have different ethnic groups in Ethiopia and different ethnic groups in Eritrea. And so when we look at that, for instance, there was this group called the Syro, they call them the Syro Israelites, right? And they lived in Ethiopia, within the highlands of Ethiopia. Well, 80 ethnic groups, and they lived in Ethiopia. And so you have to ask your question, well, who are the Syro, right? The Syro Israelites. And so this is from the book. It's called Selections from the Asiatic Journal and Monthly Register for British India and its Dependencies, Volume 28. And it says that a large number of Israelites settled in Abyssinia around 150 BC, forming a national body ruled by their own religious monarch. So that's 150 BC that you had a bunch of Israelites in that territory. So we have to understand that you also have, in that area, Amharic, you got the Oromo, and various other tribes, right? And so some people think that all of the people of Ethiopia are Israelites, and that is not the case. Just as all Bantus are not Israelites. A lot of people don't know that, right? All Bantus are not Israelites.
Okay.
And so, that's a language classification that is used for our people as well. But you identify the Israelites by their traditions and their cultures and their oral history.
Wow. Okay. Syro Israelites. Now, I gather what you're saying is if we were to compare it to America today that has, this multi-ethnic, multinational, all into one melting pot, if you will, we can take that same framework and put it over there in the country known as Ethiopia, because there are multiple tribes, there are multiple nations that are that are living on that land. But specific to Israel are those who have now adopted the name Ethiopian, but the lineage is of Shem. So not all of them, Syro being one, not all of them, though, are of the Shemitic bloodline. Is that what I'm gathering you're saying?
That's correct. And so in that book that I mentioned with the selection from the Asiatic Journal, they also talk about the Canaanites being in that area. right? And that their offspring, well, they were called the Angaba Canaanites. And there's a area within what we call Ethiopia today called Angaba, which probably holds the descendants of those who mix. Because according to this book, the Canaanites mix with some of the local population within that area, and they live in Angaba, right? And so we look at these different ethnic groups and these different areas and traditions and peoples. And some of the people have taken on some of the, like, for instance, a lot of what we call Ethiopian Christians. A lot of them have Israelite customs and traditions. But we know that all of those Ethiopian Christians are not Israelites, right? But more than likely, the ones who are the priests are Israelites. And so Turner Caicos is an island in Lake Tana where they had all of these priestly artifacts. They had the silver trumpets, they had the lavers, they had all of these things that was in the temple. And at our other channel on Odyssey, I have some clips from that video where they show you these artifacts that was on Lake Tana and in Tana Kirkos. And there's other places as well. So they not only have these artifacts, they also have supposedly the Ark of the Covenant, which nobody has seen, but we have seen the other artifacts. So that gives more credence to the fact that, okay, these people are probably the true Yahudim, right? And they maintain the artifacts, right, on that island to hide them from the Gentiles, because the Gentiles were systematically destroying our scrolls, destroying our temple artifacts, all of this stuff. And as I stated, when my brother book comes out, you'll find out what happened. And look, they were literally trying to replace us, right? This is in the history books. They have literally tried to replace us, all according to Psalm 83, and it's provable. This is in their history books. We didn't write it. Black folks didn't write this stuff, right? They did. So
is it fair to say that we're talking about that specific land now? Is it fair to say that the people who are currently occupying that place since Emperor Hadrian expelled the Israelites, and obviously some regathered back, is what we're talking about, those who are in the priestly class. But is it fair to say that all of these people who are currently occupying that particular portion of the land, even though they're Ethiopic in bloodline or Hamitic in bloodline, they are not actually they don't belong to that particular soil? Is that a fair argument or assessment to make? Because you're arguing that Jerusalem is that particular soil, correct?
Yeah. So remember, Israel was surrounded by enemies, and Israel went to war against places like Ai, right? And they went and fought Hittites, Girgashites, all of this, Canaanites, and Israel ended up defeating them. But remember, the Bible said that these people were larger and stronger than Israel. Okay, so if these people were larger and stronger than Israel, how could Israel gather enough troops to fight in that small little area we call the Middle East, right, and overcome these nations that were bigger and larger and stronger than Israel? Because Israel needed water and Israel needed food. And then these other nations that were bigger and stronger than Israel needed water and needed food, which you wasn't going to get in the Middle East. And let me show you this right quick. If you could bring up that share.
Okay.
So this is a piece my brother wrote about modern Jerusalem could never have been true Canaan land. So it says, here's a detailed timeline and analysis of the environmental and climatic conditions of the region known as Canaan, modern day Jerusalem and surrounding areas, compared to biblical descriptions of the land of milk and honey. This will clarify why environmental evidence suggests that the current land does not align with the biblical narrative. All right, so here it says the timeline of climatic periods of environmental condition. Pre-Holocene age, which is before 12,000 years ago. The climate was cooler and wetter conditions. The region, including modern Jerusalem, was rich in vegetation, forests, abundant water sources due to the Ice Age climate. Significance. The region's fertility during this period predates significant human settlement and is unrelated to the biblical narrative. Number 2, the Holocene climate optimum, which was 9,000 to 5,000 years ago. All right. It was warm and significantly wetter. The Levant, which is including Jerusalem, experienced its most fertile period. Significance. This was last time the region could have resembled a land of milk and honey with abundant resources, natural fertility, and ample water. All right. So let me go down to this image. All right. So this is all of the time that it was talking about. Now, see right here for the post-Holocene, this is where it was arid, what we see today. And this was pre-entry of the Israelites into the Canaan land. So when the Israelites got to this land that we call the Middle East, it was arid. It had shrubbery. Now, we also have a story in the Bible where, we'll talk about that later, but where the Bible talks about a forest. There's supposed to be a forest near where Israel is located, but there's no forest. It never was a forest in what we call the Middle East. So I'm like, those type of things alone, right, will destroy any argument about that being a land of milk and honey or ever having been. Because what a lot of people try to say is that, they were under the curses and so therefore the land was desolate. But let's look at what desolate means. So understanding desolate versus barren. When we talk or write, we often use specific words to paint a clear picture in someone's mind. Two words that seem similar but actually have different meanings are desolate and barren. Although people might use these words like they mean the same thing, they tell us about different kinds of emptiness. This article helps us understand how desolate and barren are not the same. Especially with examples from the Bible, we see that desolate talks about a place being empty of people, like a city that once was full of life, but now is quiet and lonely. On the other hand, barren means a place where things can't grow, like a piece of land where plants don't sprout. By exploring these words, we'll get better by using them. So basically, desolate means it's empty and devoid of people. Barren means you can't grow anything there. And so we have to understand that we have to get a better understanding of what the Bible says. Now, can something be desolate and barren at the same time? I'm sure. But the Bible specifically talks about Israel being kicked out of the land, just like a bride being kicked out of the house. Right. And so, when your wife cheats on you and you kick out the house, that's what happened to us. And so that's why it was devoid of people. And a lot of us don't realize that that's what the Bible is talking about when it says desolate.
Wow, that is powerful. Just a quick pause for those of you who are just entering in and have not got an opportunity to, please definitely hit that thumbs up button. Share this on your socials as well. We are meeting with Yakoba Eveo, talking about his new book, which is Jerusalem, True Jerusalem, the Lost Kingdoms of the Israelites. And Yakoba Eveo contends that the current modern place that we know as Ethiopia or ancient Abyssinia is the true location of Jerusalem. And that's what we're discussing today. For those of you who have already given, thank you very much. I will definitely be honoring you towards the end. And those of you who would like to give, you can do so by way of Cash App, PayPal, Super Chat, Super Sticker, or those of you listening on the replay, super thanks. And I just want to put this out there as well for those of you who are new to the platform or just listening. My interview style is to respect all of my guests and to ask the questions that I believe that an elementary person or an intermediate person that's trying to learn would ask. So if you think that I'm dense or if you think that I'm ignorant, that's your own fault and that's your own opinions, but it is not the case of the matter. I'm asking questions based upon us having an understanding of what was taken from us. So I just want to put that out there. And I thank you so much, Yakoba, for answering that question. I want to ask you specifically about the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. right? We talked briefly about this last week on your channel, and that there is this idea that really spawned an entire religious movement, which is called Rastafarianism, that the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon had children or a child, and that makes their descendants Israelites. What I'd like to know is what your opinion is on that claim.
Well, if Queen of Sheba had a son with King Solomon, then Menelik would be his son, and he would be an Israelite, right? So, and according to the Kabbalah, which is where this whole argument comes from, King Solomon had an affair with Queen of Sheba, and Menelik went to visit his dad one day, and because Israel were going through so many things and trials, that he left with the Ark of the Covenant and brought it back to Ethiopia. That's the argument. I don't believe that, right? Okay. Specifically because the Bible don't speak about it. And since the Bible don't speak about it, I give that little weight. But there is a Israelite heritage and tradition in that area, in that territory.
So that tradition is actually something that a lot of people, again, especially in the Caribbean, it sparked, like I said, a religious movement called Rastafarianism, in which they look at King Haile Selassie, as a direct descendant of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon. But my question is that pertaining to the land, we really need to understand how we can really piece together this idea of not only could there have been a lineage, which you say you don't believe because it's not in the scriptures, and I can understand that, because when you go through the patriarchs, you see the bloodline descendants of David had Solomon, he had Absalom, et cetera, and then Solomon had his children, and they named the children Jeroboam or Rehoboam, I can't remember which one, but you don't see any specific child being mentioned through the Queen of Sheba. So when we're trying to place the land and the people, I want to take everything into consideration. I want to ask you quickly, pertaining to this, about a particular passage in scripture regarding the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. So in 1 Kings 10, this is when Queen Sheba meets with Solomon. It reads, "And when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of Yahuwah, she came to prove him with hard questions. And she said to the king, it was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. And King Solomon gave unto the Queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, beside that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants." Now, I know that the maps and locations have been changed and tampered with. But what I'm trying to understand is this picture, considering that 2 Chronicles 3:1 says Solomon's temple was in Jerusalem. So archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that the Canaanites did not inhabit the region known as modern Israel, but if modern day Ethiopia is true Jerusalem, then where did Queen Sheba go back to?
I believe that Queen of Sheba went back to Sudan, which is Moro, that territory, because it's called Sabah, and she's called the Queen of Sheba. That's how they pronounce it, but it's the Queen of Sabah. And the area in Sudan and Moro is called Sabah. And I believe that's where she came from.
Okay, so what you're saying is that those who have Ethiopic descendancy, so their bloodline is of the land of Ham or of Ham, their land is actually in what we consider Sudan today?
Well, here's the thing. If you notice from the scriptures, Israel went into a territory controlled by Canaan. And according to the scriptures, Canaan took some of the land that belonged to the Israelites. Okay. And so if we know about the history of the Egyptians, right, which is Mizraim, they were Hamites. Same thing with Cush. We know that Cush were Hamites, and some of that area was what they call Ethiopia. They call it Cushitic territory. Now in Zephaniah 3:10, it talks about the Cushites. And then in Isaiah, I believe, I forgot the chapter, it talks about the return of the Israelites and the involvement of Cush as well. The Bible says about us, are you not as the Ethiopians or the Cushites or Israel? So there's a subtle connection between us, the Israelites, and the Cushitic territory, and being near Hamitic territory, right? And so let me show you this right quick. Okay, this is Genesis 2:13-15. And the name of the second river is Gihon, the same as it that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia, which is Cushitic territory. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel. Now, some call this the Tigris. There is no Tigris. And see, they lied to us the whole time. There is no Tigris. They call this Hiddekel the Tigris. There's no proof of that.
Wow.
And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, that is, which goeth toward the east of Assyria. And this is a whole nother thing as well. And I'm going to be doing a show later with the AIC that I mentioned. And we're going to be talking about some of these other territories and what we found.
Okay.
And the fourth river is Euphrates. Now, we're going to talk about where I believe the biblical Euphrates is. And Yahuwah took the man and put him into the garden to dress it. Now, remember, the garden is east of Eden. In my opinion, right, and I talk about this in the book, that Africa is Eden, right? And how can I prove Africa is Eden? Eden is where man was created. According to the scientists themselves, Africa is where original man came from. According to the scientists themselves, East Africa is where man originally came from. According to the scientists themselves, what they call Ethiopia today is where man was made from. All right, so here we have Gihon, right, which is compasseth the whole land of Cush, right, or Ethiopia, right? Now, what is Gihon? Well, let's look at this right quick, because if I ask you, where is Cush, right? You know where that is. That's in East Africa, right? And if Cush is in East Africa, then the river, all of these rivers come from the same source. And therefore, if Gihon encompassed the whole land of Cush, then that has to be the Nile River, whether it be the White Nile, the Blue Nile, or what we just call a Nile, right? It has to be that because they come from the same source. Now, here we see that 1 Kings 1:32-34 says, King David said, call in Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah son of Jehoiada. When they came before the king, he said to them, take your Lord's servants with you and have Solomon my son mount my own mule and take him down to Gihon. Okay. Now, Gihon encompassed the whole area of what? Cush, right? These rivers that we saw in Genesis 2 come from the same source, which means that all of these sources are in Africa, because Gihon is in Africa. It's in the land of Ethiopia or Cush, right? That's logic 101. And so if they come from the same source, right, and we know it's in the land of Cush, then we know that the rivers is the Nile, right? Then that encompassed the whole land of Cush. Then the Gihon that Solomon was anointed in to become king was the Nile River, because we know that the Gihon is in Cush. And if the Gihon is in Cush, right, and Solomon went to Gihon to get anointed king over Israel, then by logic, guess where's Jerusalem? It's near the Nile, or it's near the Gihon, right? And so then we have in Jubilees 8, because some people like to disregard Jubilees, whether or not you accept Jubilees or not, Jubilees is a historical document, whether or not you believe it's canon. It's a historical document. I believe it was written during the first BC or something like that, something like that. But anyway, Jubilees talks about that the Garden of Eden is east of the Gihon River. Okay. If the Gihon River is in the land of Cush, therefore the Gihon River is more than likely the Nile River. Then that means the Garden of Eden has to be in the land of Cush. And if the Garden of Eden is in the land of Cush, it says that the Garden of Eden is where Jerusalem is. That's what the scripture says. That the Garden of Eden is where Jerusalem is. Now think of this for a second, okay? If the Garden of Eden is in Cush, it makes sense. Why? Because a garden needs an abundance of water.
Right.
And the Nile River feeds that whole area, all the way down to Egypt. No better river source for the garden to feed off than the Nile River. So then, if we talk about what the scripture says about the land given to Abraham, it is from the Euphrates River, right, to the Wadi of Egypt. And the Wadi of Egypt has to be the Nile, right? We know the Nile River is in Egypt. So it's wherever the Euphrates is from the Euphrates to Wadi. All right. So if that's the case, right, we know that the four rivers are what? The four rivers are from the same source. Therefore, they are in the continent of Africa. Why? Because we know for a fact that the river Gihon is in Kush, which is in Africa. I mean, that's logic 101. And so if the land is from the Euphrates River to the Nile, what territory does that give us? Then we have to say, well, we have to figure out where is the true Euphrates, because I make the case that the true Euphrates is not in the Middle East. They have pushed everything in the Middle East, right? They push everything out of Africa. Everything is pushed out of Africa, but when you do the research, you'll find out that everything is in Africa. So let me show this right quick. So this
before you do, I want to say that's an interesting point you just made, right? Because you said they push everything in the Middle East, but when we see that particular part of land, it's a barren wasteland that they have to
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, wherever there's a river, there's going to be lush land, lush soil, but that's what we see in sub-Saharan Africa and not over there. So, yeah, go ahead and continue. I just wanted to make that point. I thought that was excellent that you pointed out.
So you notice all of the biblical places are in the Middle East somewhere. They're Iraq, Iran, Syria, right? What we know of today. I'm going to make the case later on. I didn't make this case in my book that a lot of these places are on the continent of Africa, right? So this is from the map, Guillaume Delisle, right? And you notice on this map is right here in the Guinea area, which is the Euphrates River. You see that? Now, according to this person, Elise Recluse, right? Elise Recluse states that there was a river, and it's called in the Dahomey area, which is in the same area that we saw with the Guillaume map. There was a river called the Alala River, which was called Ephra, which was known by scholars. This is what he said, which was known by scholars as the Euphrates. So Elise Recluse says that there's in the same area a river called Euphrates. And so if you look at the river Euphrates, which is over there in the Guinea area, right, which would be the Niger River, all the way to the Wadi of Egypt, which would be the Nile, would make our territory from the Niger River all the way to the Nile River. So when I always say it was sub-Saharan Africa, right? All of this is Israel, what we would call Israel, because the people are Israel. So from right here is the Niger River, all the way to the Nile, all the way down to South Africa. This is our land. Excuse me. And so the Bible says that Israel will be as large as the sands of the sea.
Right.
But yet they tell us that little hole in the wall in the Middle East, that little dirt is our land, which doesn't have any forest, doesn't have any water, well, barely any water, because they gotta bring in their machines and all that stuff with new technology to, get enough of water to feed just those people. But according
Right.
to the Bible, there were other nations in those areas as well. So when we look at these things, we have to ask ourselves, what are we discussing? Because a lot of times we think in terms of modern thought. We'll say the land of Israel, the land of Israel. Well, the land of Israel is where the people were. And that's why when I start off my book, I talk about the conspiracy and how we go from, from point to point of how they try to hide who we are. And this is a global conspiracy. Psalms 83 talks about several nations. And so when we look at this map by Godby, right, all of this is Jewish people on what they call Jewish as our people. All of this is Jewish people on the continent of Africa. Where the people are is the land of Israel. Now, of course, all of this is because of migration patterns. But there's things I haven't talked in the book, right? Because like I said, there's a lot of stuff I could put, and when would it end? Is that in this book called the Daggertoons, it talks about the Tuaregs. Now they call the Tuaregs a Berber people. And the Tuaregs were associated with the Israelites. And guess who the Tuaregs claim to be orally?
Who is that?
The Philistines.
Wow.
So the Tuaregs claim to be descendants of the Philistines, and we see here Minoan Philistines in this area. So a lot of the things that happened with our people happened in sub-Saharan Africa when we were fighting the Philistines and all of that.
Right.
Now, over here,
because they say modern day Palestinians are the Philistines, right?
Yeah, that's what they say. Yeah.
Now they're trying to make them. Now they're trying to make them Israelites, but okay, nevertheless.
Yep. But see, they had to push everything in the Middle East because once you get on the continent, that means the Israelites were a black African people.
Right.
Right. And so if you look at this map, let me scroll up a bit. You see all of these places filled by Jews. Now over here in Niger, near the area of Mali and Burkina Faso and them, that area, guess what it was called? Lamlim. And it says on another map that it was peopled by Jews, right? So a lot of people want to say people like Abraham Traore and them are Hamites. No, they're not. They're in the same area of Lamlim. They're Israelites. Okay? And so as we look here, right, on the Gabi map, and I'm going to show you a close-up, it says here pre-exilic Yahwism, which is in the Nuba area, right, which is by Abyssinia. Now, this is pre-exilic Yahwism, which they call Judaism today, but it's, before the exile of Babylon. So if there was an Israelite presence in Abyssinia or Nubia, in this whole area, pre-exilic, before the Babylonian captivity, then this has to be where the land is.
That's so interesting, right? Because they were taken from. They were sent to Babylon, which on this map, and I don't know if you can show it, but on this map, how far is the distance between Abyssinia or Darnuba, where they're at, and what would be considered Babylon? Because do you believe that Babylon during that time is what we consider modern day Iraq today?
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. You bring me there before I want to get there, Sister Ashanda.
Well,
So, and I don't discuss this part in the book because, there's more research being done. But basically, in the AIC, which is the African Israelite Collective, we're discussing these things, right? And so basically on some of the older maps, Babylon is over here near Meroe, right, in Sudan, right? And there's stuff I can tell y'all, but I'm not going to say it here because I'm going to get beat up because I haven't brought my evidence, right? But there are maps where Babylon is right over here in the Sudan area. All right. So
Okay.
Israel is right here in Abyssinia. So when they were in the captivity, they were held captive in over here near the Sudan.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, I got another question now. So if Babylon was what is considered modern day Sudan in that area, but that is also, according to your research, where the Ethiopic people are actually from, then who are the Babylonians? Like, do they have, what lineage do they share? Is there any connection to the Ethiopians or to the Hamites? I know some people say that's a stupid question, but I would like that to be addressed.
Basically, it's the Sabians.
Sabians.
But once again, the Sabians. But once again, that's a catch term too, just like Ethiopia is a catch term, just like America is a catch term. Okay, so we can't just say all Sabians were Babylonians, because Babylon was made up of multiple people. So this whole area, right, could have been Babylon. So if you look at Meroe has more pyramids than Egypt, right? And so I did a show where I talk about the languages in this area, which we call Abyssinia and Sudan and all these areas. And I did a show where I talk about the different ethnic groups and the different languages, and that how the more you go out from the source of Babylon, because remember their languages were confused and they left and they spread out. So the closer you get to the center point, you'd have more of the various languages where they were confused, which is over here. You don't have that in Iraq. You don't have like 80 different languages and ethnic groups in Iraq, but you have it here. So as you go further out from the center point, right, of when the confusion happened, you got all these ethnic groups and all these different languages. And the further you go out, the more unique the languages are. Right. So the more you go out, the more unique the languages are. And so that's another thing. So then ethnically wise as well, right? At the center of where Babylon was, you'd have more ethnic groups, right? And the further you go out, the ethnic groups become less diverse.
Right.
You don't have that in Iraq.
Right.
Okay. So there's a lot of these things that if you use common sense and logic and ask the right questions, things start to not add up, right? And like I said, there's other things we're looking into right now that it's going to be hard to believe, right? But the lie is that big.
Well, I mean, I think that if we understand what we're dealing with, right? I think, that the Bible is not a book of fantasy. It is a book of history, a book of prophecy, revelation, law, order, salvation. The Bible is a real book. And when you look at it from that context, and it says that Ha-Satan is the father of all lies, and he's the prince of the power of the air, and that he's the God of this world. I think that it helps us to understand that what most of us, and this is not just among Israel, but the world all over, have been fed lies on a continual basis. Even the scripture said that the Gentiles will come from the ends of the earth, saying that they have inherited lies and things of no profit from their fathers. So if we plug our brain into understanding that the information that we were taught or really indoctrinated with in school is meant for us to stay in a stupor of ignorance, and meant that way to keep us on the bottom and the colonial powers at the top, then you could see that the exposure of this information means that the system and what it's been built upon, now the foundation is revealed to be shaky. And so it starts to fall apart. And I think that's really what you're revealing. You're showing that the foundation of what we have always been taught or what we believe is faulty because it's built by the father of lies. So that's really what I'm seeing here. But I want to ask you, about this cultural practice. Let's get back to the, I would say, Israelite Ethiopians, okay? You mentioned earlier that Emperor Hadrian expelled the Jews from Jerusalem, aka modern Ethiopia, in the 2nd century. But you said that the Israelite practices continue to this day in the region. So when did the bloodline descendants return to incorporate these practices? And if you could, let us know some of those cultural practices that line up with the biblical narrative.
So Beta Israel, according to some scholars, the ones that we see today are descendants of Dan, the tribe of Dan. And some of the other tribes apparently left, right? And I don't have the time frame of when they left, but some of the tribe of Dan is still there because they are the Beta Israel. And as I mentioned, some are in Dahomey as well. And so when Emperor Hadrian kicked us out, that made us go further into West Africa. Now, as I mentioned, the land given to Abraham is from the Euphrates to the Wadi of Egypt, which is from the Euphrates to the Nile River. So some of the land, in my opinion, that the Israelites migrated to was the land of their forefathers, which was Shemitic territory, which was land given to Abraham. Because the land given to Abraham is to all Shemites, but the land given to the Israelites are over there in East Africa. So there's an area on some of the older maps called Ba Judah over there in Ethiopia. And Ba means father, right? Father of Judah, right? So there was an area over there called Ba Judah. And so when we look at the migrations, right, we have even the people in South Africa, which a lot of Israelites are in South Africa. And I mentioned in my book called the Nguni. And Nguni was one of the descendants of Naphtali. They are the tribe of Naphtali. And even in the Bantu language, the N is usually silent. So the name did not change. It is still Nguni. Right. And we have a lot of these type of things, like even Issachar and they're called Ishakiri and things like that. There's a bunch of different tribes that still exist. Right. And obviously we know the history of the kingdom of Judah, which was over near Ghana. Ghana, right, according to the map, was a Jewish, that's what they call it on their maps, a Jewish territory.
Right.
Right. And so my point was that as we find out where the people are, we find out the land of Israel, because the land of Israel is where the people are. Now, the different tribes, their inheritance is over there near East Africa. Okay. Near the highlands of Ethiopia, which is where Jerusalem is, and the surrounding areas, the areas where the Oromo is, parts of Nubia, things like that. And so that's the thing. When, like, for instance, when we say these people are Cushites, a lot of people like to say that these people are Cushites, and Yakoba was talking about Cushitic.
Yakoba, are you still with us?
Want to classify them. And it's the same thing they do with languages, right? For instance, Hebrew, right, is an Afro-Asiatic language. Ge'ez is a Afro-Asiatic language, right? And so a lot of these quote unquote Afro-Asiatic languages, right? What does Afro mean? It means what? African, right? And so, can y'all hear me? I was told I'm silent. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, you went out for about a second, but you came back in. Everybody do me a favor and put a 1 in the chat if you can hear both of us clearly. If you cannot, put a 2 in the chat.
Okay. All right. So they do this with languages as well. They classify things the way they want, but yet, if you look at it, if Ge'ez is Afro-Asiatic language, Hebrew is an Afro-Asiatic language, right? All Semitic languages come from Canaanite, right? Because Hebrew is a Canaanite language, right? Then they all are really dialects of Canaanite. Hebrew is a dialect of Canaanite, right? Ge'ez is a dialect of Canaanite. And so, but they classify these as different languages. It's the same thing with some of these locations, right? And they named them for their own purposes. They have the answer sheet. Let's put it that way, and we have to go through and decipher what's really happening.
So deciphering, let's get back to this a little bit because we were talking about the maps, and one of them that you named in particular in your book was the Madaba map and Ptolemy's geography. So how did they influence our modern day perception of Jerusalem?
Yeah, so the Romans, they're the ones that created the Madaba map, and the Romans are the ones that gave us our current understanding of where Jerusalem is. Right. And so, all of this happened through Christianity and through the Council of Nicaea or Nicaea, however you want to pronounce it. And this is where we get our modern understanding. And then we know about the Roman emperor and sending his mother there to the Holy Land. And then we had, the Crusaders fighting for the Holy Land, all of that. You know what that was? That was no different than what happened in the Holy Land with the British. It was no different than what happened with America. It was them trying to control a trade route. That's what it was. Right. And so a lot of the stuff, they put their twist on it. They lie about literally everything. And so, for instance, in my book, I talk about what the Bible says about Absalom, right? And that when Absalom was fighting against his father, King David, and this was in 2 Samuel 18:8, and it says, the forest devouring more people that day than the sword. So according to 2 Samuel, there's a forest. Not only that, in 2 Samuel 18, it says, as Absalom flees on a mule, his long hair becomes entangled in the branches of a great oak tree, leaving him hanging helplessly between heaven and earth. That's 2 Samuel 18:9. How can our land be in the Middle East when there's supposed to be a forest with oak trees where Absalom could get hung by his hair?
True. Wow. That, and that's where we have to break the scriptures down into bite-sized pieces, because just, looking at that verbiage, there were forests. So where are the forests in the modern state?
Exactly.
They don't exist.
So there's no forest, there's no mountains, and then Jubilees talks about the mountains of fire, which is volcanoes. That's over there in East Africa and Ethiopia as well, which talks about where Jerusalem is. I'm like, the evidence is there, and there's just so much stuff, right? And that's why I say, if you look at it and do the research yourself, you will be convinced like I am.
Amazing. Okay, so let's talk about the Bilad el-Sudan, the Israelites of Bilad el-Sudan. Who were they?
So basically, Bilad el-Sudan is basically the Black Jews, right? The land of the Black Jews. And that's over in the Timbuktu area, which is Mali today. And according to the history of the Black Jews, this is standard history, right? I'm not making nothing up. We had texts, we had books, we had scrolls, right? And the Arabs came in there and destroyed and tried to convert us to Islam, and they destroyed our text. This is documented. Okay, and so we had an Israelite presence known as Black Jews in Bilad el-Sudan, which is in Mali, which is Timbuktu area. Okay, and this is why we have to understand the history of the continent, because we are all over the place, right? And here's the thing. If we have this history going back thousands of years on the continent, then obviously Israel is on the continent, and I'm talking about where the people are. It's not a small nation, right? And obviously Jerusalem is on the continent. And some people are going to say, well, Palestine is still part of the African tectonic plate. Yes, it is. But guess what? It does not fit the dimensions described in the scriptures. It cannot hold the sustain life. And so here's the thing. Not only that, there's a map, and I didn't pull it up, and it shows a Malakuli. And the Malokuli is the one-eyed giant, which showed that there were giants in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's traditions amongst many of the Bantu Israelites of them fighting giants, right?
Wow.
And we know that when our people went into Canaan land, guess what they found? Giants. And guess what the Malokuli was? In sub-Saharan Africa. And guess what? When you think about the giants, they need enough food, they need enough water to survive. So if the Middle East was Canaan land, and I showed y'all that when the Israelites went into the quote unquote Canaan land, that particular area was arid. How could the giants have sustained themselves? Not enough water, not enough food, right? But the continent, which is the promised land, which has the hills, which has the gold, which has the silver, which has the bauxite, which has the water, that has the food, can sustain giants. More than enough, right? So it's logic, right? We have to add logic and ask the right questions, because like I said, there's two types of people. Those who believe what they feel, and those who go with what the word says, what the data says, where the data leads. And that's how I am. I go wherever the data leads, whether it's for me or against me, that's where I'm going to go. Now, if my understanding is skewed, then the Most High will fix that, right?
Well, I think you're doing an excellent job. And, I appreciate you breaking all this information down for us, because it is quite a journey. And you're right that, we have to be flexible. We have to be teachable. And we have to allow the Ruach HaKodesh to lead us. And I think that's really what you're trying to do. One of the things that I appreciated with you is that you broke down each nation within sub-Saharan Africa, because it truly is a vast land, which encompasses West, Central, East, and Southern Africa. But I was particularly interested in the rivers, right? We talked about the rivers briefly, but I want to share a quote. In 1 Kings 1, 32 and 33, verses 32 and 33, King David commands that Solomon be taken to Gihon to be anointed as the next king of Israel. This passage provides a crucial clue concerning the true location of Jerusalem. And it says that Gihon is mentioned as the site of Solomon's anointing. It's also referenced in Genesis 2:13 as one of the rivers flowing through the land of Cush, commonly associated with Ethiopia. So if the Gihon is indeed the Nile, as many historical and biblical interpretations suggest, and this places the anointing of Solomon in the region of the Nile, specifically in the land of Cush, or modern day Ethiopia. Now, this is a quote from your book. It's a very powerful statement, but what I would like you to do is give us more understanding from a historical point of view, because you said that this is a historical interpretation. Give us clarity as far as this river being associated with Ethiopia, that it is the Nile specifically, and that it is associated with Ethiopia. What books can we reference?
Yeah, so I have it in there. It should be the reference right there. I don't have it open right now. The different books that we can reference, because like I said, from the Bible itself, it tells you that it's in the land of Cush. You don't really have to go anywhere else. But there's other scholars as well that says that the Gihon is the Nile, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I have it right there on that page. Let's see.
Take your time, brother. Take your time. This is chock full of information. The reason why I ask is because I know a lot of times when it comes to us unpacking information, the first thing people will say, where are the sources? The sources. And he does definitely detail the sources in his book. If you have not purchased his book already, you definitely want to do so. It is called True Jerusalem, The Lost Kingdoms of the Israelites. But it's chock full of information and historical documentation to make his argument, definitely for sub-Saharan Africa and for Ethiopia in its current status being true Jerusalem. If you have not already thumbed up, please definitely do so, and share if you have not also done so. Were you able to find that reference?
I think so. Hold on one second.
Okay. And while I'm at it, for those of you who have questions, we're going to take about, let's say, 3 to 5 questions for Brother Yakoba as we get ready to wrap things up. So if you have questions, do me a favor and put a Q and ask your question in the comment section. And then we'll see how we can get to those questions once we wrap things up. Well, I'll answer this question from Sister Shetler, even though she didn't put the Q. Yes, there are maps and pictures in the book. Warren says, Shalom family, I got my book from Amazon, True Jerusalem, The Lost Kingdoms of the Israelites by Yakoba Eveo. I agree with Minister Yakoba. Fantastic, Brother Warren.
Yeah, so I talk also about Sidney Mendelssohn and how he talks about the Jews being in that area near the Gihon and near Abyssinia. And there was a specific scholar, and I'm overlooking it at this point, where he specifically identifies the Gihon as the Nile as well. But I'm overlooking that at this point. So
okay, that's perfectly okay. Listen. Yeah. Again, that's a lot of information for you to gather together. So I appreciate you taking the time to do so. Now, my final question before I get ready to answer listener questions to you has to do with something that you have been saying. Again, you've been saying a little bit earlier today, but you talked about Jerusalem being surrounded by mountains, right? In Psalm 125:2, as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so Yahuwah surrounds his people both now and forevermore. So is Ethiopia, modern day, surrounded by mountains? And if so, do you know the names of those mountains?
Yeah, so it is surrounded by mountains. I do know, I have the name of the mountains in the books.
Okay.
But, you got Deborah Tabor, which is Mount Tabor.
Okay.
You also have Deborah Zayet, right, which is the Mount of Olives. And there's a whole bunch of other mountains that I don't know offhand, but yes, it's listed in the book.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, well, the questions are rolling in, so I hope that you're ready to answer some of these. Okay. Again, you need to put a Q behind what you ask. And those of you, feel free also, again, to like, share, subscribe, and support to the platform. I'm going to ask the first question from Yah. Is very real. It says, are you guys ready for eyes?
So Sister Ashanda.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so one of the books that mentioned the Gihon, and yes, I do have references in the back of the book that mention the Gihon, is Josephus, Antiquity of the Jews.
Okay.
And Ephraim Isaac, who's an expert in Hebrew Bible, Ethiopic studies, and African Bible history to be the Nile, right? Okay. So you can go and check the references in the back of the book.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay. That question, I guess, was AIC stream. Are you guys ready for the AIC stream? I guess that was a personal question, but let me ask the question here. Where is Lebanon?
That's something I'm not going to discuss right now, right? Because that's one of the things I'm working on.
Okay.
With the AIC.
Okay.
And so we're going to talk about where Lebanon is. We're going to talk about where Syria is. Because remember, Syria, modern Syria, is supposedly named after Assyria. And we're going to talk about that. And there's alternatives, and I think it's pretty strong evidence, but these are from alternative archaeologists and historians. So
okay, fantastic. Now, what about the Congo? Is the Congo where it is that we know it today, or has that been shifted as well?
I mean, the Congo, remember, you got the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then you have Angola, which was part of the Congo. And so, names keep changing. But that is part of our inheritance, right? Which is part of the Semitic inheritance given to Abraham from the Euphrates all the way to the Wadi of Egypt, which is the Nile River. So,
okay, amazing.
So Congo used to be called Zaire. Right.
Zaire.
So they did. Yeah, Zaire. Yeah. Okay.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of that.
That's
before.
what King Agag was.
Okay, got a question from Lucilius. How much is the book?
It depends, because sometimes if you catch it at the right time to come down, But for the paperback, I believe the paperback is 69 and the hardback is 83.
Okay. Okay. Great. All right. Let me see if I got any more questions in here specifically about information that's in the book. Okay. Question here.
Okay.
Up next says, so were the Herods reigning in Ethiopia?
Yeah. So that, if according to my belief, it is Ethiopia, because I believe Ethiopia is where the Jerusalem is, and Herod was reigning from Jerusalem. So when you look at the highlands of Ethiopia, you look at Axum, and you look at the history of these places. So let me say this, and you could get the book and you could get the details. All right. So in the Bible, Absalom, when he was dying, he created a pillar to recognize himself, because he had no children. And so he created this pillar so that he can be remembered, because he had no offspring. In Ethiopia, they have what they call steles, and these steles are used for the same reason, to remember the ruling authority, the kings and the elites, right? So they can be remembered. And there's also other pillars and altars in the surrounding area. And remember, Abraham created a pillar. He also created altars. You would expect to see these things in the Middle East, but they're not there. But they are there in Ethiopia.
Wow. I think that just again our whole framework of how we look at the continent, because we've been fed to the continent, at least when we were children. Now, obviously that's not what they do today, but we're children. It was looked at as some third world country, not a continent with 54 countries in it. And how you break down the fact that in the continent within itself, there's a land that is apportioned to us, which we know today as sub-Saharan Africa. And then there's a land that's apportioned to the Hamitic people as well. So I think that what we're having to do is just really recreate an understanding of location, so that we can get to understand the vastness of our land and where it is that our people actually are from. So here's a question from Celestia. She says, are the present Congolese Hebrews?
Many of the Congolese are Hebrew.
Okay.
And there's a connection to them also coming directly from Spain and Portugal to Congo, right? And they were, what you call it, the what's the name of the I don't know why I'm going blank right now. Okay. You have the different Jewish population, right? Not Shemitic. What's the word? Y'all know what I'm talking about.
The Jewish, you mean the Ashkenazis?
Besides the Ashkenazis, the other ones. What's the other
Sephardic.
Sephardic.
Yes.
There you go. Thank you. So the Sephardic Jews, which were known to be black Jews, they were brought to the Congo, right? And they state that they had their traditions and their cultures, and they still practice what they call Judaism. So, but those are some things that's not in the book, because I didn't want to get too detailed.
You're gonna have a part 2 now.
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, there's enough for a part 2. There's just too much. There's too much, and that's why I say, if you take the time to do the research, to me, you can't come to any other conclusion. Yeah, and Minister Teyu, he covers that in his book, right? There's a lot of stuff in his book that y'all need to get if you really want to understand, because that's going to add really to what I'm talking about, and it will give you additional proof of what's being stated. So let me share this right quick, Sister Ashanda, if you can pull it up. So this is the George Phillips map. This is in the book. Now, some people want to disregard this because you literally have the name Israel right here in the highlands, right? And then you have Magdala, which was the city that Mary Magdalene was from. Right. And then you have Ramah, which is also in the Bible, and you have a whole bunch. Like I said, you have Mount Zayet or Debre Zayet, which is the Mount of Olives, and you have all of these biblical places. You got Mount Tabor, right, which is in the Bible. You got all of these things in this area, which is supposed to be a second Jerusalem. It makes no sense.
Wow. Wow. That's wild. I mean, when you said that earlier about Ethiopia being considered the second Jerusalem, that, that kind of blew me away a bit. But, I do know what you're saying is legitimate because they hide so much information and then they put it in these maps. But that's very compelling. Okay, I have a final question for you because the questions are rolling in, but this is kind of like it's two questions in one from two different people. So I figure I'll just ask it together. What do you think happened to the Garden of Eden? And do you think it is still protected by a flaming sword?
Well, obviously the garden isn't there anymore, but I can't tell you what happened because the Bible don't speak on that. It's just not there, but that's where it was located. Right now, if it's where the Holy of Holies is, right, and I'm gonna tell y'all this, you got to read the book to see the proof that I put, but I'm gonna tell you where the Temple Mount is because that's where the Holy of Holies is because that's where the temple was, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Temple Mount, in my opinion, according to my research and evidence that I bring forth in the book, is Lalibela. Lalibela is where the Temple Mount is, and all of this can be proven by the letter of Aristeas, right? Because the letter of Aristeas gives you details of, what it looks like there, right? Because the letter of Aristeas tells you about the land areas, right? It's a proof text that shows you, where the Temple Mount was, because according to the letter of Aristeas, it talks about having precipices and easily defended against enemies. It's on a high precipice, and that all of these things that fit Lalibela in it. And not only that, you'd have to read the book and see the other evidence of Lalibela being the Temple Mount. And literally, what I have in the book fits the description of Lalibela to a T. And so the letter of Aristeas, it was attributed to Aristeas, that is, and he was a court official for Ptolemy II of Philadelphus, right? And so he was supposedly a Hellenistic Jew, and this was the beginning of getting the translations done for the Septuagint. And so this particular guy went there to get some scholars to bring them to Egypt for the Ptolemies to write the Septuagint, right? So, but they described the sacrifices. And so the other things I discuss in my book, which you have to ask these types of questions. If you still believe that the Middle East is the true Jerusalem, how did they manage and handle the daily sacrifices? How did they get rid of the carcasses? How did they wash the blood? How did they clean the whole area out, right? The letter of Aristeas tells you how. And all of the things that you needed to do that exist in Lalibela. Everything exists there to be able to clean the Temple Mount, to get rid of the bones, to clean it. But you don't have that in that dirt in the Middle East. So what should we expect to see in modern Jerusalem? Because there's really no way to get rid of all of the dead bodies and the bones and stuff, because there's no river system that go through there. So you would expect to see a whole bunch of dead animals around the place, right? Some buried bones and carcasses and stuff somewhere.
Absolutely.
But you don't have that, right? It's not the place. It can't be the place. And so in my book, I discuss all of the reasons why literally it's impossible for that to be the true land. It's impossible.
Wow. Wow. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming in and just sharing all of this amazing and scholarly information, because really, again, we're all on our learning journey. And I think maybe about, even 3 or 4 years ago, I was still not, abreast of this idea that the state of Israel could not be the true location, but sub-Saharan Africa is the true location of not just Jerusalem, but the land of Canaan, the promised land altogether. And so I think that especially for those of us who are, are still on this journey and we're still waking up, it's very important for us to be able to have this information dissected. And one of the things that I stated before I even asked you any questions, was that I love the way that you wrote this book and the simplicity that you wrote it so that anyone could understand it and break it down. I want to thank you again for coming on and taking your time. I want to give you an opportunity before we get ready to wrap things up for any final thoughts that you had. Let people know where they can listen to you for those who are not familiar with your platform, as well as where they can purchase your book, True Jerusalem, The Lost Kingdoms of the Israelites.
Yeah, I want to thank you for bringing me on, Sister Ashanda, and interviewing me about my book. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And also, I want people to understand that the scripture states that they divided the Most High's land, right? And we know that they did that at the Berlin Conference. And we know that land was Africa, the same place that we were taken from and scattered. Really, when you ask the right questions, it's really not that hard. But here's the thing. Some people don't want you to be an African Israelite. They want you to just be an Israelite or a Jew, which is inclusive to them of anybody who's, of the religion, which is why you got all these various people, from Mexicans and, Native Americans and all this stuff. They want to be added to our ethnicity, and they act like it doesn't matter who the bloodline is. But if you admit that the promised land is Africa, then you cannot deny that the Israelites are an African people, or Negroes, as they want to call us. Mm-hmm. Right? So they can't gaslight you once you know. And that's why people make it hard to understand. But if you ask the right questions, you'll get the right answers. And so as I state before, you will get gaslighted. Mm-hmm. And people will give you red herrings and straw men, right? And if you're not pursuant of truth, you will be deceived. And so here's the thing. We are in the last days. The Most High coming for us, because if we don't, we ain't gonna make it. But if you know who you are and you know you are a covenant people, no matter what they do, you know that you have a covenant with the Most High. They cannot destroy you and they cannot take away your inheritance, right? When you know who you are, you're going to stand together. When you know who you are, they can't make you go against your people. And guess what? You're not going to be mixing around with other people because you know who you are. We've been manipulated since we've been here. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we got to understand that as these days come, you need to know who you are, where you are, and where you're going. You need to know who your enemies are. Because remember, in Jeremiah 50 and 51, the Most High says, keep Zion in mind as you leave. If you don't know where Zion is, you can't keep it in mind.
Wow, I like that. That's a good way to drop it. If you don't know where Zion is, would you say was the end of that now?
If you don't know where Zion is, you don't know where you're going. You're going to be lost like everybody else.
My goodness. My goodness. Ain't that so true? Thank you so much again. Minister Yakoba Eveo of Teo Ministries with his first book out, a phenomenal book, True Jerusalem, The Lost Kingdoms of the Israelites. For those of you who have not purchased your copy, make sure that you go and do so. And they can purchase it via Amazon or any other platforms available?
Only Amazon right now.
Okay. All right. Right now, but we moving, we're going to branch out. All right. So just order my book. You got a lot of people in here that are giving you love. Thank you again so much, Brother Yakoba, for your time. I'm going to go ahead and put you in the back and you be blessed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sister Shonda.
Family, thank y'all so much for coming in and listening to this phenomenal interview with Minister Yakoba. Eveo. Definitely go out and support the work. He's been doing a fantastic job on his platform. He has been leading in Israel for some time now, along with his brother, Minister Teyu of Teo Ministries. And I just want to thank him for coming on and taking the time. I want to give a shout out to Tuni O. Thank you so much for your super chat or super sticker. I never know which one it is, but thank you very much for your gift. I also want to thank Mildred for your Cash App. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate those of you who continue to support this platform. Those of you who do it on a monthly basis as well, I appreciate you. And those of you who support on a monthly basis on members as well as patrons, y'all be able to see a behind the scenes video of my time in Archdale, North Carolina at the Leave America Behind conference with Brother Ron Dalton and Brother Lorvins. It was a phenomenal time, and you can definitely check that out if you are a member. So family, again, thank you for coming in. I hope that this has been a blessed time for you all to learn a lot of great information. And family, y'all know what I say is always, at all times, love yourselves while hating your enemies. And until next time, family, y'all bless.